We have some guests, and we're going
By twins.
to kick it right off with the 2018-19 budget review as soon as Mike is ready.
Okay. The financial report for February, we're showing a positive, favorable balance of $157,000. It's probably easiest if we go page by page, and I'll highlight some of the changes and some of the things that, and answer any questions that you may have. The first page, we'll start off with Darien High School.
Sorry.
Yep, I'm sorry, there's some additional hard copies. Yes.
Dan.
Yep. But you have that for the transfers. Okay, so starting off at Darien High School on page 1, just a few things. We are recommending some transfers, in particular for the substitute teacher lines. You'll see that it's currently short, and pretty much all of the accounts in the substitutes are short. We're revising them to where the trend is, which will most likely bring us back up to where the actuals are in 2017 to 2018. We have an adjustment for the science teachers for the high school, and then there's also an additional amount that's remaining in the custodial line because we did have a custodian that actually had left, and we had a replacement that did that as well. So there really are three accounts here in the high school that we have some transfers going into, which would be science, the substitutes, and then we're remaining the custodial line as well. On page 2, the operational, at this stage we typically go ahead and forecast all of the operational lines to be fully spent by the end of the year. And I'm not sure if you have any additional questions on Darien High School as of now. Fitch Academy, which is on page 3, is currently in line. Middlesex on page 4. We do have some additional funds in the assistant principal because, as you're aware, we did hire a new assistant principal at the start of this year. We also had a change in the guidance, so you'll see an increase in the guidance, or at least a surplus in the guidance, because we have a guidance person that moved over to the high school moved over to the assistant principal, and there is a residual that is remaining there. So that's really why there's a positive end of the year forecast right now in the middle school and salary accounts.
Is it similar for the high school?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. The operating in the middle school, everything seems to be in line as of now on page 5. And then Henley on page 6. For personnel, everything also is in line. There is a positive variance of $7,554, but that is also due to the principal. We had a new principal that had come in. And then we also have an adjustment for the substitute teacher account as well. On page 7 is Holmes.
So with Holmes,
Yes.
that substitute teacher line,
Yes.
so did we just, it seems to be coming back in line to where it's been historically. Did we just under budget?
Yes.
Okay. And I'm going to have questions. I did a little bit of an analysis on the substitutes, and I think I'll just address that when we go through maybe the budget later on in the meeting. But
Okay.
this is one of the schools that jumped out at me in
Yes.
terms of the current and historical level of substitute need at that school.
Okay.
But I'll address that later on.
Okay.
Thanks.
And in clubs and councils, there is a transfer in for clubs and councils. In short, each elementary school is allowed to have 4 different stipends for clubs and councils. Some have 3, some have 4. they have the option, depending upon what the need is in an individual school. The need here for homes was for 4 this year, so that's why there's an increase, or that's why there's a shortfall and a request for transfer for $2,200.
Okay, and those funds are available, but also did a little bit of an analysis on the elementary clubs and councils, and it seems that it's not consistent among the elementary schools. Some of them are taking advantage of the funds that are available, but some of them are not. So does seem to be discrepancy. It's
Yes.
not consistent among the elementary schools.
So it does run by choice, correct? They have the option of at most 4?
They have the option of at most having 4, depending upon the interest that each individual school has for operating that. So there could be some teachers that do not necessarily have the interest in offering that, or there may not be students that are interested in that particular club.
I guess my concern is that we don't budget for it, but we may come to a situation
Right,
where
and
the schools that aren't choosing decide at some point they would like to use the 4 that they've been
Yes.
allocated. Okay. Thanks.
On page 6, Oxridge Elementary School. Page 9, Royal Elementary School. We had another change in the custodian.
Are they coming in at a different level, or is it just the difference of not having one and then hiring one?
Not having one and then hiring one. Tokenique on page 10. And then we're going into PE, RC 11 on page 11. We do have a transfer in for athletic training services in the amount of $3,150, I do believe. This is for us, a couple of the games or programs may need an additional services that the athletic director subcontracts for. Dues and memberships
sorry,
also.
Mike.
Yes, go ahead.
Services like what? Can you expound on that?
If there were more than a couple games that are playing at once that he deems that he needs additional services for, he'll go ahead and he'll subcontract for that. So if there was I'm not even sure what 2 games that possibly could be, a softball game and a baseball game or something along those lines.
So they just need another trainer present.
Correct, at
Probably
that
SEAC
time.
rules. But that would be probably SEAC rules that they are abiding by, what is required on presence on the field.
It's, I would defer over to I'm not 100% sure.
Okay.
The athletic director would be.
Okay.
On page 12, maintenance.
Anything specific on the custodial OT?
No, and I didn't do any transfers into that. I left that whole because there will be some offset that will be taking that back down for some of the rental and facilities that we have not reconciled just yet. So I kept that intact as to the negative until we reconcile that account and bring it in line. RC, and then yes.
Maintenance, the fencing, could you just specify the fencing entrance markings? Where's that? Or we can go, if you want to go into more detail when we talk
Okay.
about the transfers, we can do that. I'm just looking at that maintenance number.
Yep.
That's fine. We can talk about
But
that.
I could now. So this was, we
the
had to
system.
replace some of the fencing at the high school
Oh, okay.
for the baseball field. And then some of the entrance markings were also done at the beginning of the year, the first couple of months of parking lot markings that
Okay.
had to be done.
Okay, and then new equipment is just, those are the ACs that were.
Correct, so that's
The
a
elementary.
new request. It's a new line that we are going ahead, we're separating out for, so we are on
13?
page 13, line number 493. So that is for the acquisitions of the air conditioning units at those 3 elementary schools.
Okay.
RC 13 is music. Art is in line on page 15. And computer technology is also in line on page 16. There's a significant amount that is remaining in the salary account that is due to the Director of Instructional Technology not being filled, forecasting it not being filled to the end of the year. So when we do look at the salaries, at a 10,000-foot level, the salaries are in the positive, around $285,000 or $289,000. It really is attributed to 3 different areas. One would be the middle school guidance counselor that I briefly had mentioned. The second area would be of technology with a large vacancy, and then the third area would be under RC 16 would be the superintendent.
Right, so those are numbers
So
that.
those 3 are basically bringing us over for the salary line, or at least.
So
giving
those
a
are just
positive
anomalies,
variance.
and then eventually
Correct.
those positions will be filled.
Yes.
Well, to be clear, they're based on current year staffing, but
They
people
are.
shouldn't expect to see them year over year because those positions hopefully will be full.
Correct, yes. Administration, RC 16 on page 17. As I mentioned, the superintendent. And then as well as the legal services account. I think we've went through this a couple times regarding our trend and where we're forecasting at the end of the year. We're still on forecast of ending at $323,000, which would give us in the negative $70,639. On health, RC 17 on page 18. Everything is in line. A minor variance with the nursing staff. RC 18, personnel. We're looking at our long-term subs being slightly over as of now, 500, and that's really as a result of any type of long-term leave that any teacher goes on.
We do see the forecast adjusted there for the long-term subs. Is that something that will correct at some point or adjust?
Yes.
Transfer for later down the
Yes,
road?
I would do another one later on.
Okay.
And then in budget control and the highlight, what I'll start doing as well in response to the board's questions, I've highlighted what budget control we've currently utilized and what is currently remaining as we go forward. RC 19 curriculum on page 20. Everything also is in line here. And RC 20 finance is on page 21. Same. The library on page 22. Everything is in line. And RC 22 on technology. Everything is also in line with budget. RC 23 continuing ed on page 24. Everything is also in line. And then we're into special education on page 25 and 26.
And we're just adjusting that downward.
we have some minor adjustments. For what we'd like to do for '24 is to keep everything intact for the most part, with some minor transfers, and because as we know, we have a different excess revenue.
Right, but we're making
offsets
that transfer
some
for
of that.
substitutes.
Except the transfer for substitutes, correct? Under 25, fixed costs. Everything also is in line. We'll continue to monitor our heating fuel and electric use, in particular the heating fuel as the winter months come through. But everything right now is in line. And when we're looking at insurances as well, we've already made some adjustments previously in the insurance. Everything else is coming in as forecast, and the retirement and OPEB is as well coming in as we forecasted as well. And that leaves us with RC 26, Early Learning Program, on page 29. We do have some transfers going in order to reconcile the substitute teacher account that we've already previously had mentioned. And there has been some minor changes in the special class teacher lines with people coming in and out of that account.
So we're not adjusting today for the, or next week for the special class teachers, that's that 10,000?
No.
Okay.
On 26.
It says it, professional development, training at the beginning of the year?
Yes, Laura did some additional training at the beginning of the year that brought that line over. I believe that had to do with restraint training for teachers. And with that, I do have a listing of budget transfers before you.
Okay, so we just start at the top
Okay.
and see if people have questions as we go down.
Okay.
So the assistant principal, what is LOA?
Leave of absence.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to clarify that.
So a leave of absence that occurred, a little bit more of leave, gives us an additional amount remaining in the account.
So there's nothing particularly out of ordinary from any
No.
of these transfers that we typically
No,
see this time of year?
there's really, no. One that we had briefly talked, so the in and out of some of the salary lines are just a reconciliation of some of those accounts that people have been moving in and out, or there's a retirement or a resignation that actually occurs, or a change in staffing. We've discussed briefly the clubs and councils at homes. There were 3 stipend positions. Now there are 4 stipend positions, so we're transferring the 2,240. There was a request from the principal at Holmes to transfer out of the periodicals into the general teaching supplies account for some purchases that they would like to go ahead and do, and in the amount of $761. So you'd see that as a wash between the 2 accounts. We've mentioned briefly the substitute teacher account as well as the athletic training services for some additional coverage that have occurred. There's also a transfer in for the professional development at the beginning of the year. Chris Manfredoni had all of the coaches attend some additional all the phys ed teachers attend some additional PE at the start of the year. We do have some transfers in for improvement of sites. We had some fencing repairs at the high school as well as entrance markings at some of the elementary schools. And the larger one is for the new equipment for maintenance as the air conditioners at Holmes, Henley, and Royal. And the rest, our substitutes and some minor salary adjustments. I don't know if there's any particular line.
At a high level, like on the substitutes, is some of that caused by the change in how the pay is done, or is there also a trend in, do you know, like I want to hear, in the need for substitute teachers, or is it more the difference in how they're being paid? But that changed last year, correct?
It did. So they were always taking advantage of it. So teachers were covering for teachers. And now they got paid $30 for each class that they were covering for. So when we adopted the budget last year, we didn't necessarily have all of the back as to where the trends currently were.
Okay.
So we were under budget for the substitute teacher account. So now we're bringing it back up into line where the previous fiscal years were. But when you do look at some of those lines in 16-17 going into 17-18, there are some significant spikes in the high school and the middle school, but it is a result of teachers now getting $30 a class for covering.
So
another
you
teacher.
could account for that, because the high school has jumped up pretty considerably. In 2016-17, it was about 65,000, and now we're looking at, in this current year, 92,000. So it seems like a
Yes.
big jump. Is it just that $30? It can't be.
Yes.
Because aren't we still hiring other substitutes as well? So I guess where I'm going with this is, if you're not needing to hire an outside substitute and you're using an inside teacher, it's $30 versus, I'm not sure what the cost is.
Well,
but, you know,
so yes. So
there doesn't seem to be any, it seems like there's just a gross effect, not like a net effect. In other words, are we saving any money by using teachers?
So Mike, can you explain? I don't think it's a trade-off of it wasn't that we weren't hiring anybody, or we were? Can you explain?
But clearly we
Correct.
were. So I guess
teachers were always covering for classes.
They weren't getting
prior to that,
compensated
but
for
they
it.
were not getting compensated for. And then when we went to the negotiations, we got less personal days that teachers could actually take. We went from 5 over to 3, and this was a trade-off as part of a whole package that was just one example of part of a trade-off that had occurred. But they previously were covering the classes. Now, we weren't necessarily sure as to quantify what that value. We thought that the value was going to be about $20,000.
It's coming closer to 30,000. Well, now, I mean,
Correct.
I guess with the adjustment, we're at 92,000.
Yes.
So it's almost $30,000 of an increase
Yeah.
of DHS, which seems to me to be quite a bit of a jump
It
up.
is.
Well, so an internal analysis maybe for the administration, but not for the board, might be to look at how much of that is contractual, and then are you seeing higher absentee rates, which is stuff that we
Right.
wouldn't necessarily deal with. But that could be
Right, if
interesting
you
for you now
could
that the
dig-
contract is in effect.
dig
and
a
the
little
paying
deeper.
is
Yep.
in effect, and we have that data. So
Yep.
it sounds like last year when we were budgeting, we didn't have the data. We didn't
Correct.
know exactly what it was going to work out to be.
And I guess, is that the same situation at the middle school?
Yes. And that's pretty much all, because elementary schools are a little different.
Right,
They're
you
not
have to
able
hire
to
a substitute.
cover.
So those, those numbers. But so there was a jump up at the middle school, but it was only about 13,000
Yes.
compared to the high school, which is close to 30,000.
Mhm.
So yeah, it'd be great. I'm just me looking at the numbers and trying to get a handle on it. I see DHS, MMS, and Holmes, the sort of things that schools that I picked up on
Yes.
that were trending a little bit differently than maybe the other elementary schools. Something just to think.
You built that into the budget that we're going through.
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions on it? Any other questions on Krista?
Just to clarify, going back on the clubs and councils, to confirm whether it's 3 or 4, whichever the elementary school chooses to run, similar as with the athletics, they have a tiered stipend schedule, so some school may choose more expensive stipend clubs than another, so we wouldn't necessarily see the same.
You would not,
Expense.
but it wouldn't necessarily, in the elementary, it would not, it's a flat, but then a tiered, depending upon how much experience you have. So
Got
if
it.
you have 3
Like a
years
step,
experience, then you're up at a higher, but if someone new coming in, you would be at a lower first level tier.
But it's not the club.
It's not the club,
staff.
it's the experience of the staff.
Correct,
So
yes.
that would differ, it would explain why we would see different rates at different schools because
Yes.
of the
Yep.
experience of the
Well, and I also think
administrative.
not every elementary school is running as many clubs and councils as the
That's the other
others,
part.
so
That's
that's also a factor. Anything else on the transfers? Okay, so on the agenda, we have public comment. Do we have any public comment? So then we'll move on to the 2019-2020 budget review. And Mike did provide a revised spreadsheet so that we can all see what the administration has proposed as well as board members have proposed. And Mike, do you want to walk through, I think there were a couple changes since our last meeting?
Yes. So the one that we are working off now in the upper right-hand corner says revised 2/5/2019, just to make sure everyone's working off of the correct copy. The superintendent originally proposed a budget of 2.98% increase. The first column are some changes that the superintendent is recommending to his budget for the board, and those changes total an adjustment, a negative adjustment of $161,000, which brings it down to 2.82%. The following lines are what the Board of Education had highlighted at its last board meeting, some of the accounts that they would like to look at further, and that's how the second section is broken down into. So I'm not sure if anyone has any questions right now for what the superintendent is recommending for changes. We can start there and then go down to the board's recommended changes. Okay. And do note that I am here by myself today. So if I cannot answer
make
your
them harder
question,
and
I will
longer.
get back to you. Right?
This could be answered on Tuesday night. I certainly think it's a good idea to not budget for services offered that would be offered otherwise. I'm looking at the special class teachers, mine even. However, I do know that there are children who are not blind who require assistance with visual, who require visual accommodation. We just want to make sure that there is a way to administer that.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
The other question, I'm not sure which it goes in, but when we're putting in the new air conditioners, did the administration put in not just the money for buying the air conditioners, but also the money for running them?
Yes.
Thank you. That is in the new budget?
Yes.
And then a board member had made a recommendation on the substitutes to bring that line in back to where we are in the current fiscal year.
Yes, so I did, all the substitute lines I have adjusted to bring it in line to the revised projection. And I do have a comment in the comment section of admin recommended.
So that is now an admin recommended reduction.
Well, so I was the one who asked for current year over year. Mike, tell me if I'm reading this correctly. That's a reduction I looked for. You have taken my suggestion and then put in what your suggestion
Correct.
is on that. So I will amend my motion to, or my, what's the word? My modification, thank you, to match the admin modification. I wanted a re-scrub of that line, which is why I brought it all back down. So if you've re-scrubbed it, I'll take the admin's recommendation
Okay.
on that.
So that would be on Tuesday night, you would modify your, or you can do it now? Okay.
You can do it now because we're just
Okay.
modifying. It's not a standing motion. So when you redo this list, you can put in your suggested.
So the suggestion that I have is in this list right now. So
Okay.
if we
So
look
you're
at,
good, you're basically good with what
I'm
he
good with
has
their
in
recommendation.
substitutes.
I wanted them to go back, re-scrub their numbers. I didn't like the rate of increase that we were seeing, and I didn't like accounting for it in the budget that way. So I asked the administration at our last meeting to go back to year end. I think that caused them to re-scrub, and I'm fine that they're more comfortable with this rather than the full modification that I was proposing.
And then Mike, the other night, I withdrew my modification for the Director of Instructional Technology. I got the information I needed, so we can remove that modification.
and then there was also another one, just to make sure, was there another removal that we were going to do as well, which was the interscholastic equipment?
I was gonna say, yes, if the ice machine, it became clear that we are just replacing a broken ice machine, so that is a replacement for $5,500, so that could be, put back in.
Was that
Okay.
your modification, Mrs. McNamara? I just don't remember off the top of my
Yes.
head.
RC 11, line 416, object 24006, athletic training supplies. It was an ice machine.
No, I'm just asking, was it your modification? I just don't want to remove it if it was someone else's modification and they're not here.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it was just, we clarified, it was just to replace a broken ice machine, so.
So just so that that line should be deleted from the next spreadsheet?
Yes.
Okay. And then there was this is why we have a new one as well. When we look at interscholastic equipment, supplies, and rentals, I did have the wrong line item, but the amounts were the correct amounts that were previously reported. So it's line 442, interscholastic equipment, supplies. There was a proposed adjustment for swim and dive and boys and girls for 50% cost share. I wasn't at that meeting, but I did have a note that was going to be removed.
It was removed, yeah, that evening. So we
Okay.
can take that off.
Take
the
that one out
separate
as well?
piece, yep.
Okay.
Dennis didn't remove his.
Dennis did not remove his, and to
No.
clarify.
No,
She removes.
she removed swim and dive.
Okay.
I removed the cut. Dennis has the ad, but to clarify, and I don't want to speak for Mr. Maroney, but I believe he was looking at all the off-sites and not specifically one team.
It wasn't just to boys and girls hockey like you have in your note.
And your,
Yes.
and your,
It was
And the
other
value,
programs.
The
right, I was
value.
back
That
to.
is correct.
right,
Yes.
it just, he's not
Okay.
targeting one
First
team.
and
I
I'll-
would just.
I'll make that comment.
And on that particular line, I think Marge is the Title IX officer for the district, so I think it's probably a good idea to have her take a look at that, because anything that we change in terms of funding could have Title IX implications, so she should probably opine on that.
Okay.
Okay. Does anyone else have anything on that first?
Mr. Feeney, can you ask Dr. De Silva the textbooks in PE where those were booked?
Okay.
Thanks. And then we have the back side of the page too. Everyone, don't forget to turn over. I mean, I will strongly advocate for not altering budget control. Looking at the number of sections we have to break is 6. I think the administration has made a strong case that 4 sections of budget control are necessary. So it is on there, but I will strongly recommend against it, just because when we have sections break, and or as we've seen the past year when we have IEPs that require staff, we need to be in compliance as soon as we can, rather than going through a reappropriation process. Just so you all know where I stand on that.
I agree with that. I guess in this current year, we would know at this point, for the most part, if there was going to be another section break,
So section break, we should not have any, but it would be questionable now as to whether or not that there's anything else that comes in particular the area of special education.
Right. So we've used, in this current fiscal year, 111,882, but we still have funds remaining in case there's something
Correct.
unforeseen, for instance, in special ed.
Yes.
So the budget control, I guess, just to clarify so everybody knows, it's not necessarily to be used for a section break. It can be used for other personnel things that
Correct.
come up during the year.
It's most usually used for staffing needs.
Staff.
Right, so it's mostly used for
With-
staffing needs, but it's not, I guess I want to make clear that it's not necessarily a section break per se. It might be some other personnel need that arises over the course
No,
of the
so
year.
there's really no way, Mr. Feeney, correct me if I'm wrong, the history on this, there's really no way to know what might come up as part of a mandated IEP. However, what we can do is look at how many sections we have in a break. So as a budgeting tool and mechanism to go forward when you're making a budget, when it's a good, healthy way to say, okay, I have 6 sections that are close to breaking. So I at least 4 of them are very close. I should budget that way. We don't hem ourselves in such that
Right.
there's a contractual expense that's needed we don't provide for it, or we don't have other things that show up that's necessary there. But it is very realistic with 6 sections on a breaking zone to at least say, okay, let's plan for 4. And then if not, like anywhere else, there are other things that come up. But mostly this is driven by enrollment and or contractual expenses that we must give to children immediately. So
Correct.
for the most part, you're talking about not putting staff in front of kids or doing that with a delay.
So I agree that certainly enrollment is a fantastic place to start, and it's important to start there. Is that accurate, however, that the only analysis you really do to set that number is section breaks, or is there other analysis? Again, I understand we can't necessarily predict IEPs, but...
In general, we start by looking at the elementary as to the absorption rate that's in the elementary report as to how many classes could be absorbed but if we had an additional 4 students. So that's really where we start and looking at that. And in particular, I believe this year there's 5 concerns that we have at the elementary level. And then we also, so that's really where we start at. And then we work with special education in the high school and the middle school as to where they currently are as well. And then we use that going forward. So we are recommending right now 4. And elementary, there are some concerns, and then we do have some concerns at the special education level as well. And when we do go back, and we typically do, when we factor everything in, at least for, we try to keep it low. And 4 seems to be a realistic number, but when I did go back in history, it seemed that in 2015, 2016, I believe we had set aside funding for 8, and there were a lot of perhaps sections that could have broken in the elementary level in particular.
Okay. Now, I note based on that, however, that you mentioned elementary and you mentioned high school and middle school, and of course it will vary year over year, but we are, 1.5 of the 2.5 we've used are high school and RC19.
Yeah.
So are there conversations at the secondary level or with RC19 as well
Yes.
as a third input to this?
Yes, there is. Yes.
Okay. So it's not just sped at the high school and the middle school, it's...
Correct. Oh, absolutely. It is not.
Anything else?
Budget control. Something.
No, I think it's prudent. I don't think we can tie the administration's hands by eliminating this line item totally. I'm comfortable with what the administration has accepted. I think, Mike, the only thing that you can know from a special ed standpoint is what's potentially leaving in terms of the high school or seniors graduating. You know a little bit about who's coming in, but that changes through the course of the year.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you did a good explanation on Joe's question. But, we just can't tie the administration's hands with having the flexibility to make those decisions.
The only other thing I have strongly just to put up a flag is I think Mrs. Stein and I both proposed $100,000 change in excess cost, and I am comfortable, given the information that the administration has given us about this year doing that. However, from what they said in our budget meeting January 5th, I don't know that I'd be comfortable doing that year over year. So I think that while we've been looking this at a percentage base overall, we're going to have to start looking this at a year over year submission rate, such that this number we've trended up, but from the information I heard at that budget meeting, we may not be able to sustain that trend up. We may have kids who are no longer qualifying for excess cost, and or if there is a change in the formula. So people shouldn't expect year over year for us to be able to increase that. That is not an ever increasing number. It is based on our student population. We are seeing trends that number, that threshold may be very different next year.
Correct.
Correct. Okay. So I'm comfortable with the increase this year, but next year I might be telling you something different.
So, recognizing that this is so difficult to predict, we were off by a pretty good amount last year. So I think that when we go forward, that as a group, we really need to agree to each of the assumptions, or understand each of the assumptions that underlie the number that we get to. I think we should be very explicit. Of course, you have here what we think the thresholds are going to be based on our best guess. We have here what our estimated number for submissions is as of December. I think we should be clear about what we arrive at, what the assumptions that went into. We can see that typically increases March to December. Do we think that's going to be the case? Can we document that in terms of that being an assumption? I think that we need to be very clear that we think it'll be fully funded this year, although not necessarily in previous years, because I think as we sit here, we need to be all in agreement about how we got to this number, and then be able to communicate that out as we go forward, because I don't want us to be on our back foot in terms of trying to defend the decision. We'll make the best decision we can, but as clear as we can be about how we got to that number.
So I'd be a little careful, and sometimes it's just the words. Like, I don't think we should ever be on our back foot about excess cost. We track it very, very detailed and very specifically from what I hear in the office, which is why sometimes we have better return rates than the towns around us. So I do think, the special education department can explain to us exactly how they track, if that's helpful. But I don't think this board should ever feel that we need to be on our back foot, and we are playing with an algorithm that the state chooses to be wonky with, not the Darien Board of Education. So I think while it is good to explain, and if the board needs another explanation of how we track excess cost, that's healthy. But I do, some of the variability I think is not within our control. And so we should just acknowledge that. And as much as we can control or we can explain, I think we'll ask the administration to do that for us.
So I think that's actually, I think being on our back foot, I don't mean that we're on our back foot. I mean it's a very variable number. So we have to be very clear about how we got to the number we got to, so that there is an understanding that we have absolutely done our very best to get to that point, so that we are not in a position that the fingers say, you guys didn't do any work,
Yeah, I would hope nobody says
I
that
don't
about
thi-
us. We
I-
spend
I'm
a lot of
exa-
time on excess cost.
I'm exaggerating for the purpose of effect. But I think the point is a lot of work does go into this. It's extremely variable. The more clear we can be about how we got here, I think the better the conversation.
I think that just makes it helpful for the public too, because there is so much of it, what we don't know from the state. I think the more we can supply on our end, the better overall the analysis will be.
But at the end of the day, it's really about making a guess.
Right.
Oh, right, no, 'cause
it's our best guess.
Right, exactly. There's two components.
So we can ask them all over, well, how are you making your guess? But they spend a lot of time doing it. They give us the best information possible. I don't think there's any dispute about that, but I think absent some objective standard or enlightenment from the state, which apparently isn't coming, it's always going to be our most educated guess. And this seems like we get a very educated guess each year.
Right, so
I think, but to everyone's questions and everyone's point, if there's an uncomfort level where people are not comfortable with that, there's a full-time person doing this, tracking it, filling out paperwork. The intensity of it, if I'm hearing there's people are not comfortable with the conclusions we're coming to, we should have that conversation, but we've got to give some credit to the professionals and the person that's doing it full-time also. And to Tara's point, we continue to seem to get better return to other towns, which proves the point of our focus on it and how we're doing it.
Also, the more we say that, the more they're going to look at us. So,
Well,
we got a
well,
fair
they're-
return on ours.
They can look at it all they want.
Yeah.
It's still what
Right,
we
it's
file
accurate,
and what
right.
the state does.
Agreed.
Right, and what the
It's
state
that
does
simple.
is unpredictable. So at
Yeah.
this point, we can guess what they're going to do in
And we
terms
can
of
get to
return.
analysis.
The idea was to be
We can get
100%.
Paralysis from
Yeah.
analysis on this. It is what it
We'll
is.
never get it
What
to
we
the
started
dollar
with.
because we'll never know exactly.
Originally, we
what-
were supposed to be funded 100%. We're already looking at, 68, 72, 74. We move around. So there's a flaw in the fundamental application of the algorithm. But I do think if we need to explain it better, there are questions of it, we try to do better every year. I do give credit, but I think the whole town of Darien, the taxpayers, are the beneficiary of how good we do it. And if we can help explain that better, we'll continue to do that, to Mrs. McCammon's point.
Yeah. And just so you know, that the population changes in this every year. So if someone moves from the elementary over to the middle school, it changes. And middle school over to high school, it changes. So in the elementary school, if someone or a child has one-to-one staffing, right, and now all of a sudden is put into a classroom of 5, the whole funding formula that we're actually applying has changed. It's
Right.
basically, we no longer apply anymore.
Which is often what we hope too for the growth of the child, that,
Yes.
that interventions have helped successfully, so that we had one-on-one financials, but we hope the child's grown and been able to access their education, and
Correct.
so a group setting, the least restrictive setting is the
Right.
best. So just so when people hear that, it's not that you move, all of a sudden you lose your one-to-one, but
Yep.
maybe all the right things are happening, but then that changes our formula
Right.
again.
Yep.
Right.
Or our submission.
Right.
Um,
So every year it's readjusted and analyzed as things
Yeah.
change. But there's always that unpredictability of what is going to happen at the state level, and we can
as
only
well.
do our best guess on what that's going to be. Any other questions on the budget control?
Early learning.
Any other questions? I again wanted to just bring up substitutes, and I think we talked about that enough, and maybe just to take a little deeper dive in to see what is actually at DHS and MMS. And I think it's just historically at Holmes, those numbers seem to be higher. And then I think it's great that the administration has recommended that we stay at the current fiscal year level for that. Any other comments, questions on transfers?
You mean on the modifications?
I'm sorry, on the modifications,
Yes,
not the
early
transfers.
On the early learning program
Yes.
tuition, we did hear back from administration. I understand that there's a desire to peg us more or less to the current market rate. I wanted to hear back from administration about demand. I think there's an understanding that we are fully confident that parents would continue to pay at this price point. I think it is worth understanding that because we have to be 50-50 to be in compliance, we have to be more sensitive to whether or not parents would, in fact, enroll at a higher price point. I don't disagree with it. I just want to make sure that we've thought about it. And there just wasn't anything in the note we got back indicating that we had looked at that. That's my first point. My second point is I do think if we want a baseline, we could possibly smooth it out, and or we could consider what the appropriate timing is. We're getting ready to have a new building, and that also might be a good time to baseline. So,
It was my modification. You can answer maybe some of Mrs. McCammon's overall questions about do we think, sorry, my husband's texting me about laundry. That actually happens. My analysis and looking at the early learning program is that, we're going up about $5,000, so it is kind of smoothed out. It's not really a significant increase overall. And yet our teaching staff, our percentage increases and special teachers are 7%. Our teachers' aides are up 8%. So I do think that at some point we have to at least keep up with some of our costs. So we're looking at raising 4.5% when our contractual expenses are well up over 5%. Mine was an attempt to take that increase, kind of cut it in half to smooth it out, which was my theory on the 4.5. The administration may have a feeling on that.
Should your tuition paying typical peer models, just a question, be paying for increases in staff that likely have to do with disability?
So 50%, I went 50% because 50%, I didn't give them the entire increase because 50% of the population is tuitioning in, just like if they were at a private school. Now there is a need for them also, so I don't think they should incur the whole cost. But if you were at a private school, you would be paying the whole cost of your teacher's tuition. Here, this is just the percent increase. They're not paying close to 50% of the teacher's salary. So that's how I came up with my 4.5. To your question on why if the administration feels that we'll still maintain enrollment, you could answer that. I mean, Laura could answer that, but Laura did not seem bothered by this increase, is what you reported back to
So
us.
she was not opposed, which is different from in favor, but.
I'm sure no administrator is going to say, no, don't give me more money. I mean, we probably expected that.
I just wanted to push on
Well,
it.
she's not getting more money. She's not getting any more money. In fact, if she was opposed to the increase, I would expect here, because she is, to Ms. McCammon's point, going out asking for more tuition. What Ms. McCammon is worried about is that a deterrent to children entering the program, right? If I understand it.
Lose enrollment because we're too high.
So this increase is $4,600 across about 50 students. I have to think the percentage increase is not going to be overly felt, but the parents could let us know if that $4,600 divided by 50 was a deterrent to the school. But at some point, we have to keep pace because our contractual fees are rising. We can't, I mean, every private school goes through a tuition analysis.
The tuition increases every year.
The tuition increases every year. I don't know somewhere that doesn't. So, I mean, I proposed it, that's how I looked at it, that we are experiencing contractual increases and yet holding at artificially low increase rates. But I don't think would I have liked to propose something quite higher, to be honest? Yes. But to your point of kind of smoothing it out and bringing things in line, I felt that this was a gradual step. But I'm open to board comments or administration comments.
Well, I guess I would be curious, does that small increase take us out of market? In other words, are we still in line with what the other preschools are charging? And
If not under.
Right, so.
We are.
Right, so.
We're not the lowest because we don't want to be the lowest, where we're basically undercutting a local preschool environment. Basically, now everyone's coming here. We're not the highest as well. We're still, even with a 4.5%, we're kind of in the middle of the pack. It's very difficult. We did do the analysis on an hourly basis based upon what the tuition was, but it's very difficult because everyone's hourlies are different. So we have a little bit more extended time where there's others that basically have a 3-hour or a 4-hour. And those, but even when you do the hourly rate, we're still okay. We're not the lowest, we're not the highest. We seem to be in the middle of that
That's the bigger point. We're
path.
still competitive within that.
Correct.
And-
Mike, do you have any information as to, wanted to look at that number of 4.5. How does that compare? Do you have any sense from the other community preschools as to what percentage increase that they were looking at?
I don't have the
Yes.
percentage increase. I have what they currently charge.
Right. I somewhat am concerned just at the rate at which, not the model to get there. I'm worried that if all the other community preschools are looking at 2%, 3%, 3.5%, and we come in at 4.5%, what is that doing to our current 3-year-old parents, or those who are just applying in, expecting to come, and now we're looking at a 4.5%? I think I'm wondering if that is in line. I don't mind if we're getting there, if there's a benchmark which we feel we should be, but should it be tapered like we do in other contractual arrangements? So I'm a little concerned at 4.5.
Okay.
So $4,600 divided by 50 parents, roughly, is $92 in addition on their tuition bill.
Okay, what
I
about-
have to argue that cannot be a deterrent.
Well, especially if they're still
Well, we
in
heard
line
from-
with the market.
I mean, we can make the argument that $15,000 for a swim team budget divided by 60 kids is how much per swimmer.
No,
So, I
because
mean-
this bill is actually going to the parents. This is the bill.
I
that
know,
will go.
but
Their bill will increase $92 this year.
Right, and what was the swim team increase when we looked at it per family?
No, but it's different. You're actually tuitioning in. So
No, it's
These
the
are
cost to
people
the
that are
parent.
paying to
The
go to
cost
school.
to
I
the
don't think
parent.
it's an
it's
apples
a
to
tuition
apples
versus
comparison.
activities fees. I mean, you could do that with textbooks and everything else.
I
I'm
mean,
just
it's
saying that
cost to the parents that I am concerned at all of a sudden going 4.5. Is that in line with what other community preschools are looking at on an annual basis?
I thought that Mike just said that they did look at that.
No, he said he
and
doesn't have the information.
no. So our tuition is in line.
Our tuition.
Our tuition is-
Okay.
So the
It's currently in
percentage
line.
increase over last year would need to be similar. If we were lower last year and we're still middle of the pack, then we must be relatively in a percentage-based increase in the same.
I just don't have what they're proposing
no, I
for
understand,
next
right.
year is what
Right.
those
So
increases.
we don't know how much they're going up.
Do we have the number at which tuition for these kids is fully covered? Are we subsidizing typical peer models?
Some we are subsidizing, yes. And we're
like free and
basing
reduced
that
lunch.
upon a free and reduced lunch.
Okay, but
And-
otherwise, we were assuming that the current rate of tuition fully covers expenses.
Correct.
No.
No.
That's my
No.
question.
No, our current tuition does not cover all of our expenses.
Okay, we are subsidizing everyone.
We are, yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Feeney, any information on healthcare for me?
I do not.
Keep hoping.
Okay, anything else on the budget, proposed budget? Mike, nothing? No? Everybody good?
Did you, anything on the capital budget?
Well, this next, what you printed today doesn't have capital
It
on
does
it.
not, no.
I think we all saw there was a question on the univentilators, that we saw that both those projects were priority 2, that the board voted to move to priority 1. I've put a modification on to cut it. I think that was the question, were the ones we moved.
Right, I
So
had
that
asked,
question-
were they, I had thought one was a priority one had been a priority two, so we still haven't heard back.
So they both were priority twos.
Okay.
We originally had proposed Holmes, the replacement of the 1930s wing as a priority two, and the ventilation staff and offices in the 1930s wing was a priority two as well.
So someone had moved both of those.
were changed to ones, and then we also had increased the replacement of the 1930s wing unit ventilators to include abatement for an additional 100,000 where it was previously presented as not including the abatement process.
So could you clarify then with Mr. Lynch, because my modification was go back to remove those back down to priority two, and to ask Mr. Lynch how much money he needed
Yeah.
to study for the project. Originally, he told us 60 to 80. If he could give us a smaller dollar amount, it's a
Okay.
little bit big of a spread for a budget.
Okay.
Because my modification will be for the study that he would like, rather than the whole money in the project.
So it'll be a net so that we can do a
Yeah, it'll be
study
a
to
net.
see what the
Okay.
real need is.
And Katie, was your modification on the security, was that to reduce it to a study, or is that to cut it altogether?
I cut it and she added money in for a study. It was two different modifications.
Two different ones.
I cut
Okay,
it.
so that'll be another thing.
Security booth?
Yeah,
Oh, I don't want to study.
not for the security booth. You wanted a feasible.
For Lynch's.
For
This is-
Lynch.
The security booth is a full cut
Yes, I cut
at
the
a time.
security.
If someone would like to put a study in, I didn't put a study in. At the moment, it stands as a full
I
cut.
wasn't sure if it was what it was, I just wanted to clarify.
I cut that booth.
Yeah. Okay,
Okay.
so then we just need to, oh, sorry.
I'll have some questions about that tomorrow
We
night
did
in
this
terms
too
of
for the unit
future
ventilators, not
yeah,
for
planning
just-
then, the security booth cut. I'll have some questions.
Okay.
You know, in terms of what the original goal was, and then how we can figure out if we want that original goal.
Okay.
So you don't have that information, because typically we don't do even further on cut night. We go through the modifications and we
Just
amend
a vote.
motions,
There's
so
no discussion.
maybe.
There's no real discussion.
If you could ask
There's no
Dr.
discussion.
Landon to prepare a memo for us, and we'll have the memo available for the public as well, just so that night continues, but then
On
Mrs.
Tuesday night,
McCammon.
it'll be quick. It'll be going
Yeah.
through each of the items and yay or nay.
But if Mrs. McCammon needs that information, or anyone else
Provide
needs
it
it to
in
make that
advance.
decision, she should have it beforehand.
Yeah. So what the original goal of the.
Will do. Yeah.
Thank you.
Gotcha.
But just to be clear, on that evening, there won't be further discussion on those items.
We typically don't take further information from the administration. At that point, we are going through our modifications,
Right.
and that's kind of the point of this meeting, to get everything we need.
Right.
So if we can get that and a memo out, and then we'll make the memo available to the public so they have the information as well.
Will we have that information before the meeting, though?
That's the goal, so that we can make the modification that night.
Not at the meeting, just to clarify, it would come out.
Prior to the meeting.
Prior to the
in
meeting.
advance of the meeting, Tuesday night.
Yes.
For the security booth. Right.
Security booth.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else, committee? Okay. Motion to adjourn.